Next section, it's called Realizing the Magnitude. And by that, I mean the magnitude of art, the journey, the actual journey, and actually realizing and taking it in. I just want to level with you guys. You know, like a lot of you guys have seen artists like, you know, just posting stuff, and you know, you just see them just posting out awesome shit, maybe in an hour, maybe in 2 hours, and you're like, what the fuck? Like, this is so good in 2 hours, in an hour, like in 30 minutes, in a little sketch in 5 minutes, you did that. That's fucking great. Why can't I do that, right? There's so many ways to see art these days that we don't appreciate as art. You know, like we see games, they're beautiful now. We see visual effects, CG, 3D animation, 2D animation. All of it looks so fucking good. And like we have the internet at our fingertips, so we're exposed constantly to thousands of artists of like professional caliber who've been doing it for their entire lives, right? And it's good. And there's so much of it. There's an abundance. So it's really misleading because we just see it and we're like, there it is. And they did it. And look, this guy keeps posting every day. Like, what the fuck, you know? And I just want to really, really emphasize that that's super fucking misleading, man. Like the fact that there's so many of us and like we could draw stuff and whatever, it seems like it's so easy to get. Sure, it's easy to say if it's everywhere. Sure. But like to do is like probably the furthest truth you could imagine. Anyone who's picked up a pencil and tried, you know what I'm talking about. But I really want to just like put in a perspective how incredibly huge the task of the visual art is, you know, like, and I'm just talking about visual drawn art. That's a huge umbrella term. Anything that you've drawn, specifically, I'm talking about narrative art. So representational narrative art that, you know, you're drawing creatures, people, places, whatever, and you're showing something, you're explaining something happened, you know, that sort of thing. Just everything that's involved there: draftsmanship, characters, design, acting, composition, values, color, all the shit, camera, fucking so much. And then that's just in a single drawing, right? If you talk about comics, if you talk about animation, film, games, the mechanics change. There's so many. It's just added more. It's everything in the 2D, or sorry, in the visual, you know, 2D, I guess, still image, but more, way more, right? So it's like, holy crap, it's huge. But let's go back. We're just talking about the 2D still image, right? Normal drawn art. So I just wanted to give a little like little metaphor as to like kind of what the magnitude, I think, of what drawing actually is, right? If I was to tell you to recite a page from a book, like any book at all, the whole page, could you do it? You probably can't, right? Like down to the fucking period, like perfectly that page, top to bottom, go. Could you do it? I couldn't. Like, I'm sure no one can, right? And especially if it's a book you've never fucking read, right? Like, how would you do that? You can't. It's impossible, right? So now, would you get frustrated with that, though? If I was like, hey, this book, To Kill a Mockingbird, page 127, tell me word for word what it was. You wouldn't be able to. And then you also probably wouldn't be frustrated. I'm bringing back that frustration thing because it's super important, right? You wouldn't be frustrated at that because that's like way too much beyond the expectation. It's like, what the fuck are you talking? What, 127? To Kill a Mockingbird? Like, sure, I read it in high school, but I'm not gonna, I could barely fucking summarize it. I don't know what page 127 was. What the shit? Right? But you're not gonna be frustrated. You're not gonna start as like, you know, what did it have to do with? Like court and stuff and laws and it was like segregation and shit and I don't know. You see, like, I can't even do it, right? But I'm not getting frustrated because it's like, it's just been forever, right? So kind of keep that in mind when you're trying to draw something and you haven't read the book once, even once, then like, you're not going to get it. You're not going to fucking read the page. There's no way, right? There's so much. If you were to try to recite the entire book, you're so fucked, right? And the entire 2D, like, fucking spectrum, like the still image, to become a pro at that is probably the similar amount of work it would take to recite an entire book, like flawlessly, you know? Like a painting, imagine each stroke of detail is like a word, right? This isn't really a good like analogy here, but it's not bad. It's a good example of like how much fucking work goes into, how much education, how much experience can go into in the just the learning process and art and everything like that. It's so much, you know? And I don't want this to sound daunting. Like, I'm sure that's like a daunting task would be to fucking recite page 127 to Kill a Mockingbird, right? Like, why, you know? Oh, you know, I bet actors would be like, dude, no problem. Give me 20 minutes and I'll recite that entire thing. All right, if you're an actor, cool. You might be pretty solid for art. Different language, but you know. But yeah, I wanted to really put the task like in front of you. Just, you guys gotta realize how big, how huge the art process is, right? And so being frustrated with not being able to like do what you want to do is very, it's backwards, you know? You wouldn't be mad at yourself for any other reason. Anything as insane as drawing, you know? So like, you definitely have to realize and accept that it's totally cool because it's incredibly hard. Art is a lifelong journey, 100% all the way. So don't feel bad about, you know, starting now, starting a little late, like whatever. It doesn't matter. You know, it will always be a lifelong journey, no matter when you started. You'll always be learning, which I'll get to later. That's the real part of the expectation with art. You know, if you're trying to change your expectations, change them so that they are toward what the reality of art is, and that you have to do this a lot. You have to do it a ton. But the cool part is it's fucking great. And that, like, that's part of the greatest things about art. My favorite thing personally is that it is a lifelong journey. It's with you forever. You're not going to be better than it. You're not going to be done with it. You're not going to outgrow it. I mean, you can, if you're not super into art, sure. But like, if you're like me, you fucking drew something and you're like, holy shit, you communicate with people in any way. You wrote something, you did something, and people like are affected by it. And when you get that taste of that power of like, whoa, I made something from nothing, and like, there it is, you know, like people like it, maybe people don't, whatever, it doesn't matter. Like, you created something. And like, for me, dude, that's like the shit. That's top tier, like my pee hard, you know, it's fucking great. Like, nothing's cooler than that. So the fact that I could do this forever, not run out of content because art is so limitless, it's amazing. And then like, it can keep growing too. As I'm getting better, I can explore other topics that I couldn't before. As I'm getting better, I'm getting faster, so I could do bigger stuff because I can quickly flesh out stuff, you know? Not to mention all this other stuff. Like right now I'm making videos talking about the journey, talking about all my experiences, and hopefully, you know, shining some light on concepts and perspectives and ideas that people might have gone through and, you know, are struggling with. And it's so cool that, like, you know, I could interact with you guys like this, and it's all because of art, right? So it's like, it's not even just the art. Art itself is already amazing, but everything that's around it, there's so much cool shit. So please realize the magnitude of art is fucking insane, but the payoff is 200 times more insane. It's so fucking cool. So yeah, I don't know. It's huge, but don't let that be frustrating or daunting or whatever. Make that be how amazing and like why it's so worth it. But that's not what this video is about. Everyone has their own like kind of why is art worth it to them sort of thing. And it's important for you to figure that out on your own. Yeah, just wanted to kind of throw that out there. The last little section I wanted to talk about in this act, in the realizing the magnitude act, is going to be about being okay with where you are at, right? And this is just always going to be a thing all the time, no matter where you are in art, no matter, like, I'm 11 years in and I have to be okay with where I'm at. You know, people who are just starting, they have to be okay with where they're at. This is the reason why, is because if you're struggling, if you're upset with it, then it's just gonna add to that emotional conflict, and it's gonna be a lot harder for you to put your nose to the fucking grinding stone and like get to it, you know? Any baggage that you're holding on to is not gonna help you. If you could turn that into like a challenge and motivation, sure, but like for me, it just seems like this is wasted resources, right? And the reality is, it's totally okay wherever you're at. It doesn't matter unless you're getting paid. If you're getting paid and you have requirements and you have shit like that, that's the only time when you have to not only be very comfortable with where you're at and be okay with it, but also be able to perform and, you know, do what's required of you, right? But you're a professional, so you should be at least familiar with this demand. But for everyone else, you know, if you're studying, if you're learning, if you're in school, if you're a professional too, and you're just trying to up your game or whatever, it doesn't matter. Being okay with where you're at is like just being okay with being you, right? Like that's so crucial all the time. Everyone's like, oh, you're gay, be okay with it, right? Like, oh, you're trans, be okay with it. Like accept yourself, you know? And that includes your skills. And like, you can't expect to be fucking good on something that's a whole mountain, you know, like right off the bat, right? So again, this is about those expectations. Art is so huge that if you're not okay with like being bad at it or being bad for a while, you know, then it's like you gotta fix that first, you know? I'm assuming most of us have experienced being bad at something, like really bad at something, like getting your fucking ass kicked in a game. That's the same thing. Like, you gotta be able to be okay with that, right? If you play a game and you get your ass kicked and you're like, fuck this game, weak mental fortitude, right? If you play your game, you get your ass kicked and you're like, wow, I'm really curious, like, what is about this game? I want to play more, you know? Like, I got my ass kicked. I want to learn, you know? Like, that's cool. You like the challenge. Maybe the mental fortitude's up there, you know? You're like, cool, sweet, you know? Now you're getting into the meta of whatever game. Oh, what are the mechanics? How can I manipulate this? How do I do a back kick? You know, how do I do that? The learning process of all this is what fuels being okay with where you're at. For me, I see where I'm at and I know what I need to work on and I know what I want to explore. And like, that's what I'm so excited to do, you know? When it's like, oh, do the same thing I've been doing, I'm a little less into it, right? Just because I've done it for a while and it's like, I know what I'm doing, right? For the most part. Am I a master at any of it? No, absolutely not. I would never claim that. So there's tons of areas I could be working on. But if I'm not working on those areas, it's kind of just like, meh, you know? Like for me, character design is always something I've been like struggling with. If I'm just making a character that's like the same, it's kind of like, why am I doing that, right? If I'm exploring acting or poses or whatever, it's like, okay, fine. But if I'm like designing a character that's the same, I'm going to be like, bleh. You're like, I'm going to just think like, ah, man, I should be pushing this. I should try something new, you know? So yeah, being okay with where you're at is just so crucial to being a human. You don't look at yourself and you're like, oh no, I'm hungry. Oh man, I'm hungry. No, you're like, oh, I'm hungry. That's how life is. You get hungry eventually. And then you eat food, right? Like if you can get art to that point where you're like, I'm not good yet, but I will be good. Then you're like, oh, I gotta draw this cup next to me. And then the more I draw it, then I'll be better at seeing what I'm drawing. And then cool, now I could draw my hard drive right there. Why is it out? I don't know. I'm gonna draw it. And you're like, I'm gonna draw my keyboard. That looks like a pain in the ass. Fuck me. All right, let's do it. You know, and then you're like, that sucked a lot, but I learned. Cool. Oh, one of the other things I wanted to mention is like not being good is a blessing. Like, trust me, it's like that earlier part is a lot of fun because you're constantly being challenged. You're constantly learning new stuff and you have no expectations of you yet, except your own, right? So your own expectations are going to fuck you. But that's when you have to rethink all your shit and get your fucking ducks in order and be like, why am I thinking this? Why am I even trusting myself to be thinking like this if I don't even know art? Right? Like, I don't know it yet, so you're no authority of it. You know what I mean? So it's like, don't listen to yourself because you don't know what you're talking about. And then just be okay with it. I'll rehash again on the whole, like, being bad is like some of the funnest times to be an artist because, like, again, without the expectations, that's when you could truly explore, have fun, fuck around, make mistakes like crazy, and just like learn as much as you possibly can, you know? Like, as I've been doing paid work for the past like 4 years and a majority of my time goes to that, which means I have very little time to fuck around, very little time to explore stuff. And it sucks. Like, it's like, damn, dude, it's hard to squeeze it in. Either I mess with a commission piece and like try to spruce it up or try to take something, but it might take too long. And then it's like, oh no, I'm spending a lot of time on this piece. And then things kind of get a little weird, you know? And that shouldn't be what art is. I mean, if you're doing it for pay, then obviously you got to do what you got to do. But if you're doing it for the artist in you, when you're not entirely doing it for pay, you need to explore, you need to grow, you need to learn. That is the journey of art. You'd never just like sit there, cool, I could do this, now I'll do this forever, and I'll die. Sweet. Like, when you don't know how to do stuff, that's when you're learning the most. When you're trying new shit, that's when you're learning the most. And so all of that's core to being okay with where you're at, you know? If you're not okay with where you're at, it's going to be a lot harder to like sit down and do it in the first place, let alone experiment and fuck up. Be okay with making mistakes because you have to make mistakes and make them all the time and try new stuff and just just fucking, yeah, that's part of the process, you know?